Okay, welcome to slide review for quiz number 2, religious figures. Um, we have 10 slides, and I will be giving you 4 of them to identify in class. And you're going to give me 4 items. Number 1, what is it? And you'll tell me what the subject matter is and the material. So if it's Buddha, it's going to be a standing Buddha or a seated Buddha, for example, or a Bodhisattva or Avalokiteshvara. And you'll tell me what kind of stone it is, whether it's gray schist or limestone, marble. Those are the type of choices you'll have. And if it's painting, I want you to tell me whether it's ink on silk or ink on paper. Number 2, who is it? What country or what culture of origin it comes from? And number 3, the dynasty or the period, and hopefully the appropriate century or range of centuries that corresponds with the dynasty. And why is it? A couple sentences about the object. Okay, let's get going. Number 1, this is a standing Buddha from the Gandharan period and the Gandharan region. It's made out of a gray slate and is from the 2nd to 3rd century CE. So we remember that there are no figural images of the Buddha from his death in about 5th century CE, 5th century BCE until about the 1st, 2nd century CE, when the Gandharan images started appearing like this one. The things to note about this are the characteristics of that mark the Buddha. We have the Urna, which is the third eye, the Ushnisha, which is the top knot on the top of his head, the half-closed eyes, the folds in the neck, which you kind of can't see here, the mudra, the hand gestures, which have kind of been cut off here, but we can assume that he was using the Abhaya mudra, which means come in peace, no harm. And the mandorla, the halo, the mandorla behind him, which is a single, unadorned mandorla behind his head. And this is a typical rendition of the Buddha from the Gandharan period. We have a soft kind of body underneath the flowing robe, the dhoti, and the string drapery is how we describe the way the folds are rendered. And we see a slight protrusion of the stomach, of the breast, and the knees, and that little stomach that protrudes is what we call the prana, the breath of life. Very soft and beautiful rendition. Number 2. This is the Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara, also from the Gandharan period and the Gandharan area, which is the area between Pakistan and India on the way to Rome from India. This is a gray schist, just like the slate. It's that gray color. You can always recognize the period and the area as Gandharan when you see that color of stone. And Avalokiteshvara, again, is by far the most commonly known, most famous Bodhisattva, which, again, is an invention of the Mahayana schools of Buddhism, as opposed to, which only appeared in the 1st to 2nd century CE, coinciding with the appearance of the first images of the Buddha. What differentiates the Mahayana schools from the Theravada schools, which are the more conventional routes that Buddha had recommended, are the salvational figures. So, whereas in the Theravada traditions, you find your enlightenment by following your own path, your individual salvation. You give up all your belongings and all your friends and all your family, and you give up being able to cook your own food and go begging for your own food. But it's an individual salvation. It's what they call the conservative or the orthodox or the terrible law of the Buddhist traditions. Whereas the Mahayana schools, and the Theravada schools were much more popular, and still are prevalent in South and Southeast Asia. Whereas the Mahayana schools, which appeared in East Asia along the northern Silk routes, created these bodhisattvas, which are beings that had reached their enlightenment but decided to forego going to paradise in order to come back to earth and save others. So you call upon the bodhisattva to come absolve you from your sins, and so it's these salvational figures. So you can lead a secular life, you have to give everything up, and you still have the chance for salvation during your own lifetime. The things to note about this Avalokiteshvara are the Hellenistic features, like the way the zigzags on the bottom of the clothing, the zigzag kind of pattern there. Again, we see the string drapery, but it's kind of a deeper relief, like the togas that we'd see from the Roman and Hellenistic renditions of sculptures. We know that it's a bodhisattva because the bodhisattvas were allowed to keep their accoutrements and their material jewelry and fashions and material things. So Avalokiteshvara here is wearing the necklace, a sash, a scabbard, these armbands, and some hair ties, things like that. Those are all the shoes, even the toga. I mean, not the togas, the sandals that look like they're also from a Hellenistic area. Those are how we mark the Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattvas versus the Buddhas. And again, there's some similar characteristics, like the Urna, we see the third eye and the top knot that echo what the Buddha looks like. And part of a single unadorned mandorla, again, behind Avalokiteshvara's head. Avalokiteshvara sometimes manifests as a male, sometimes as a female. Here we see Avalokiteshvara as a male with the wavy mustache and the wavy hair, which is something to note because of it's also the Eastern facial features and the Western facial features and Western style hair as being something that shows up with sculptures along the way to Rome, obviously. So we know that there's a conversation that was going on there. Okay, and he's standing on a dais, which looks like it has little figures down at the bottom underneath. Those are probably devotees who had commissioned the piece and were earning good karma points for commissioning this sculpture. Okay, number three. Here we see a seated Buddha. And this is one of the 8 important events of Buddha's life. After he's reached enlightenment, he goes to Sarnath and he preaches his first sermon. So it's the seated Buddha preaching his first sermon. You can just call it seated Buddha. And this is from the second half of the 5th century, during the Gupta period, which is the golden period of India. So they ruled the world economically, politically, socially, religiously, and the style of the Gupta sculpture emanated throughout Asia because it was so popular and so dominant. And let's see, the description here says the Gupta period is often referred to as India's golden age, and this is what Sherman Lee would call the typical Buddha. When we think of a picture of the Buddha, this is the image that we probably think of. Again, we see the characters of the Buddha. You kind of see the Urna there. There's a top knot, the Ushnisha. Here we see the hair has evolved from the wavy hair into these top knots or snail shell curls. We've got the half-closed eyes, the folds in the neck, the hand gestures and the mudra. Here he is counting the Dharma on his fingers, preaching the law. Sitting in a cross-legged position. The dhoti, or the mantle, the clothing, is clinging to the body in what we call a diaphanous, and the body underneath is a very smooth, rounded type of figure. There's no kind of musculature or anything like that showing there. And we see that kind of strange hemline near his ankles that indicates that there's actually a piece of clothing on top of him. The design right underneath his crossed legs is a rendition of the lotus flower, which is a very important symbolic flower in Buddhism. And now the mandorla has turned into something that's very elaborate. That's what we would call a double mandorla, the halo behind his head. And we see 2 little apsaras, celestial beings, that are adorning the mandorla itself. And you'll notice that the carving and the relief behind him is very elaborate. This is a progression of what we saw in the Gandharan period. Now we're 300, 400 years later. Again, at the bottom, we see devotees that probably commissioned this piece for good karma. Let's see, what else can we say about this? Reflecting the new rationalism and humanism that permeated all aspects of Gupta culture, art forms and styles developed that provided the prototypes for areas quite distant from the subcontinent. In sculpture, the period fostered a new naturalism as well as a harmonious ordering of a new vocabulary of forms. This highly refined system of aesthetics produced softer, gentler curves, fluid transitions from volume to volume, and a sustained and complete harmony of smoothly flowing forms. Strict geometric rationalization. This system evolved into one of humanity's greatest art styles, the classic Gupta style. He's got a serene face, it's described as. The description here has a lot of information on the description on how the art historical description, if you want to know the type of language that we use in art history. And there's plenty there to take from for the 4th point. Why is it? Number 4. This is Buddha sheltered by Mukkulinda, the Serpent King. If you tell me that it's a Buddha with a Serpent King under the cobra or under a Serpent King, that's fine. It's Cambodian, and we can tell by the crown that Buddha is wearing here, which is kind of unusual. That hat is reminiscent, it's typical of the Cambodian traditional dress, and it has that strange hairline that is very characteristic and immediately tells you that it's Cambodian. And Cambodia is one of the water cultures that was formed along Southeast Asia. And again, there's all those tributaries that flow down north and south from the Yangtze River in China, which separates all those countries down at the bottoms, which is why we have so many water cultures, so many different little cultures there. And because they're all water cultures, the imagery that existed before Buddhism came includes lots of serpents and water animals, and the serpent is a very dominant symbol. So here we see it's a famous story of Buddha being sheltered from the rain by a serpent. And this is a common theme that shows up in Southeast Asian sculpture. It's bronze from the first half of the 12th century, from the Angkor Wat period in Cambodia. Let's see. He's sitting in a meditation pose, seated on the coils of the multi-headed serpent Mukalinda. In Cambodia, Buddhas are frequently adorned with princely ornaments, such as those seen here, including a crown, earrings, necklace, armlets, bracelets, and anklets. He wears a monastic robe drawn over the left shoulder with a rectangular lappet hanging from it. So this is one of the few examples, exceptions to an unadorned Buddha. But we know that this is Buddha because he's sheltered by the Serpent King. And again, the metadata here explains that it's specifically Cambodian, that as opposed to regular Buddha images that we see with no accoutrements, this one is definitely adorned with decorations and jewelry and things like that. Okay, it's bronze. Number 5. This is the Bodhisattva. Can't see it. This is the Bodhisattva in the form of Manjughosha in Tibet from the 13th, 14th century. This is a small piece. It's made out of a copper alloy and it's inlaid with turquoise. It's small. Let's see, 12 3/8 of an inch. So it's kind of a tabletop piece. And we know that it's Tibetan partly because of the copper color, or sometimes it's a gilt bronze. And the inlaid semi-precious jewels. They're tiny, tiny, little tiny decorations that are extremely intricate, and the carvings even are really intricate with a lot of action and a lot of movement to the sculpture itself. It's characterized by a conservative and complicated iconography and the acceptance and adaptation of figures, facial types, and clothing associated with many other cultures in various areas. So, like we said, Buddhism spread really fast and far because it was an adaptable religion. So every culture that it came into contact with, it would absorb and morph and conflate with the existing indigenous spiritual beliefs there. And this is one of the examples where Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, takes on the characteristics of here the figure Manjughosha, which is a wisdom bodhisattva of wisdom. Oh, Manjushri, which is the bodhisattva of wisdom. It's a Kashmiri influence on Western Tibet. That's neither here nor there. And he's sitting on a dais, which is shaped like a lotus, and holding a book, which signifies that this is Manjushri. If you just tell me that it's a bodhisattva, that's fine, and you can describe all the different decorations that signify bodhisattvas, like the earrings, the necklace, the armbands, the sash, the clothing, all the different jewels, and the crown, of course, the intricate crown. Again, you could see that fierce kind of countenance in this piece, which is indicative of the Buddhist tradition in Tibet. Like I said, the the Buddhist monasteries were housing all these. They were repositories of sacred texts and sacred objects. So the monks that were living there were trained as warriors to protect this. So the armies basically would be trained in the monasteries, and the Tibetan monks were the fiercest of them all, and it's reflected in this kind of a sculpture. Okay, and plenty there to take for the description of it. Okay, next, next piece we have is a bronze figure, or a copper alloy. They call it a copper alloy. Bronze is an alloy of 3 materials, the lead, tin, and copper. So depending on the mixture of the different alloys, we'll get a different color. This one happens to have a lot of copper in it, which gives it that green color when it oxidizes. Shiva is one of the 3 major Hindu gods. We have Shiva, the Hindu god Shiva, who is one of the 3 major Hindu gods. We have Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva,
the destroyer. Here we have Shiva as Lord of the Dance in a presentation called the Nataraja. It's a very famous presentation, and this is the most common depiction of Shiva that is around, that you'd see him dancing in a ring of fire. It's from the Chola period in the 11th century. This one's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If a single icon had to be chosen to represent the extraordinary, rich, and complex cultural heritage of India, the Shiva Nataraja might well be the most remunerative candidate. It is such a brilliant iconographic invention that it comes as close to being a summation of the genius of the Indian people as any single icon can. Sculptures of Shiva dancing survive from at least as early as the 5th century, which is the Gupta period. But it was under the rule of the great Chola dynasty of southern India in 880 to 1279. 1279 is the year that Genghis Khan took over China and established the Yuan dynasty, exactly 1279. So it lasted from 880, which is the 9th century, to the 13th century. So that was from the Song dynasty. It covers the entirety of the Song dynasty, actually. That the world famous iconographic type evolved. The setting of Shiva's dance is the golden hall of Chidambaram at the center of the universe in the presence of all the gods. Through symbols and dance gestures, Shiva taught the illustrious gathering that he is creator, preserver, and destroyer. As he danced, he held in his upper right hand the Damaru, the hand drum from which issued the primordial vibrating sound of creation. With his lower hand, he made the gesture of Abhaya, removing fear, protecting, and preserving. In his upper left hand, he held Agni, the consuming fire of dynamic destruction. With his right foot, he trampled a dwarf-like figure, Apasmara Purusha, the ignoble personification of illusion, who leads mankind astray in his dance of ecstasy. Shiva raised his left leg and, in a gesture known as the Gajahasta, pointed to his lifted leg to provide refuge for the troubled soul. He thus imparted the lesson that through belief in him, the soul of mankind can be transported from the bondage of illusion and ignorance to salvation and eternal serenity. It's a common theme. Encircling Shiva is a flaming body halo, Prabhamandala, of surrounding effulgence that not only establishes the visual limits of this complex and dynamic composition, but also symbolizes the boundaries of the cosmos. Oh, so symbolic. I love it. As devout Hindus, the Cholas revered Shiva as their tutelary deity in his role as Lord of the Dance, or Shiva Nataraja. Under Chola patronage, the concept of Shiva Nataraja became closely associated with the performance of one particular dance, the dance of bliss, or Ananda Tandava. And with one particular pose, a four-armed Shiva standing in the back of a dwarf, like with his left leg poised in front of his body, it is believed that Shiva first performed the dance of bliss in order to redeem a group of sages who were practicing an unorthodox form of Hinduism. In an attempt to resist Shiva, the sages challenged him with a tiger, a snake, and a dwarf demon. Shiva subdued all three. As a result, the Lord of the Dance often wears a snake belt and an animal skin loincloth, and he usually stands on the back of a dwarf. These three creatures symbolize the Untam. Right, so we see his hair and the ring of flames. This is a piece of bronze, a bronze piece from the 11th century, copper alloy, they call it, which is a variety of bronze. Very lovely. Okay. Next we have Ganesh, who is the elephant god, the Hindu elephant god. This one's from the 13th century again, so it's right at the end of the Chola period, same period, and right when Genghis Khan's taking over China again. It says Hindu and Buddhist, which is not uncommon. Worshipped as the god of good luck and remover of obstacles, Ganesh, the elephant-headed son of Shiva and Parvati, is one of the most popular gods in the Hindu pantheon. The rotund body and short legs of this 11th century sculpture of Ganesh typifies representations of the deity. Ganesh's elephant head is the result of a quarrel between Shiva and Parvati. Angered by Ganesh's refusal at Parvati's behest to let him see his wife while she was bathing, Shiva cut off Ganesh's head, and Parvati was devastated with grief. In order to soothe her, Shiva replaced the head with that of the first creature he saw, which happened to be an elephant. Ganesh holds a broken tusk in his right front hand. In addition, he holds a mace and a lasso, which are symbolic, respectively, of his position as god of war and his ability to advantageously ensnare a devotee. This, I think it's in this is the Brundage collection in San Francisco, late medieval period. And that is one incredible sculpture. Look how deep the sculpture is and how deep even the relief in the background. This is what you call a sculpture in the round. And that is an incredible amount of detail. So well balanced and so detailed. Oh, that is what you call a majestic sculpture. Okay, here's our last piece. This is hanging scroll, ink on silk, and it's actually indigo ink. That's the dark blue that you're seeing there with gold paint on top of that, which are very precious materials. So a lot of religious paintings and sutras you'll see done in this style with the indigo and gold. And Amitabha is a Buddha, the Buddha of the Pure Land Sutra. There are many sutras. I think we've gone over that. And is wildly popular in Japan, very popular in Japan. And he is, just like Avalokiteshvara is a deity of salvation, so is Amitabha, also known as Amida. And it's an even faster, simpler route to salvation just by calling upon the name of Amida. So you'll see people praying Amida, 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 and holding something that looks like a rosary. This is from the 14th century Kamakura period. Again, this is the period that samurai were up and coming. And it's actually called Buddha Radiant Awakening. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the name of the book. Again, we see a triad, right? This is a common theme. And we'll see the stylization of the clouds as they're descending and the drapery as it's flowing out behind them. We see double halos on these figures. And you'll notice the face is a broader and fuller on the bottom. And he's got a sort of bald spot right on the top there, which is sometimes what the Ushnisha looks like in Shakyamuni. The top knot is sometimes a bald spot, which they say sometimes the Ushnisha on the Buddha is sometimes described as an extra brain. And sometimes it's a bald spot, which is described as the part that heaven sees, that heaven looks down on him on a bald spot. So stylistically, Amida is traveling on a lotus dais, again, a floating dais. And again, the curls that we see in the clouds, those are taken from characteristic of Chinese painting and Chinese art. They're what we call mushroom clouds. And you can tell that it's a Japanese painting, partly because of the way the rays are straying out. They're perfectly symmetrical and even, radiating from the center. And we talked about this before, that it used to also be a part of the Japanese flag before World War II ended. Now it's just a white flag with a red circle, which represents the rising sun. They call themselves the land of the rising sun because they're the most eastern part of Asia. And before World War II ended, they had red rays radiating out of the center from the red rising sun. This is a hanging scroll painting, ink on paper. This does have a title. It's specifically the White Robed Canon, who is Avalokiteshvara. This is what Avalokiteshvara is known as in Japan. So we know it's from Japan, giveaway from the title itself, right? Who is the Buddhist deity of compassion, meaning that. It's during the Kamakura period, which is also the period that samurai really came into the forefront in Japanese history, which is in the 12th, 13th century. This is also in the Cleveland Museum of Art. And we can tell this is Avalokiteshvara because she, in this depiction, I'm going to say sometimes it's a he, is sitting on a rock overlooking a river, right? And with a bended knee pose with a hand resting on it, that's specifically Avalokiteshvara. We see the crown, which here also has kind of a veil coming off of it. The necklace, which is very reminiscent of the style of necklace that Avalokiteshvara wears in the Tang Dynasty, right? And we see the folds in the neck, elongated ears, and the mantle, which is partly exposing the breast here, the urna, and of course the crown that is kind of a replacement for the Ushnisha. Okay, what's a mandorla behind her? What's really important here is that because it's ink on paper, what we're looking at is the brushwork of this is very calligraphic. We're looking at in China, they very much value this what they call a dry brushwork that has the undulating thinness and thickness that we see here, which is a much more expressionistic material and style, as opposed to more realistic or naturalist styles that had preceded this. And it's indicative of a turn in the philosophy of art, a turn in art that turns more toward a philosophical basis as opposed to the naturalist or realist type of paintings. And you'll note that the style of the stylization of the water there, the way that it's rendered, the curls there, is specifically Japanese, the way that it's rendered there. It's got a little more curl to it than it would in a Chinese depiction. And it has a very flat kind of graphic quality, which we'll see also in Japanese paintings. You know, there's another face in there. I've never noticed that before. Do you see that on the right? There's another face in there. Interesting. Okay, let's keep going. This is Bodhidharma crossing the Yangtze on a reed. Bodhidharma is the traveling monk from India who famously crossed the Yangtze River on a reed. So anytime you see a monk figure with the hoary face, the hoary hair, and the bulging eyes, it's almost always indicative of a foreigner, or what they would call in China a barbarian. This one happens to be Bodhidharma, and you can tell because he's on the reed. And this is a hanging scroll, ink on paper. And again, it's that calligraphic line with the thinning and thickening of the brushwork there, with the dry brushwork. And at the top, we see an inscription with a couple of seals, or chops, we call them. And it's probably the artist or another artist that inscribed a poem there. And maybe both of them put their chops on there. This is from the Yuan dynasty, which is the Mongolian period when Genghis Khan installed his great-grandson Kublai Khan as the emperor there. It directly follows the Sung dynasty, which they have just conquered. 14th century, and this is in the Cleveland Museum of Art. So Bodhidharma is the monk that traveled to the Shaolin Monastery, where he wasn't allowed to come in, and he sat up in a cave facing the wall for 9 years before they let him in. And once again, he established the largest library, the largest repository of sacred scriptures. Because it was that a repository of precious items, they were there to defend it, right? So we know that the monasteries is where a lot of the martial arts training and warrior training also took place. And the Shaolin Monastery is very famous for the Wing Chun style of martial arts. Bodhidharma is also the founder of Chan Buddhism, CH'-AN, which is what becomes Zen Buddhism.